Now I want to show you some go-to measuring methods you can use in your drawings. I like to set up my drawings with shapes, angles, and by drawing the negative space. But once I have something up on the canvas to work with, I find it's good to go in and check my work with measuring. I find it's easiest to do this before too many details are in place. Then I can push things around with freedom, since I haven't invested much time yet. First, I'm going to show you how I would measure in a digital piece in the Procreate app. If you're working traditionally, you can use a ruler or a straight edge to measure. For this first measuring method, I add a new layer, and I grab this white color so it'll show up on the drawing. Then I bring down the size so it'll be a nice small line. Then I drag a line horizontally across the reference and my drawing, tapping with my other pointer finger so that it snaps to a perfectly horizontal line. Basically what I'm doing is I'm dropping horizontal lines across the major landmarks of her face. So at the brow line, at the root of the nose, at the part of the lips, and at the bottom of the chin. I also add one across the eye line. Now I can see how things fall in the reference in comparison to these lines, and also how they fall on my drawing compared to the lines. They should be the same, and when things don't line up, that's when I know that something has to be adjusted. So for the most part, things are lining up, but I do see some discrepancies. And if it's ever important to get a likeness, you'll want to fix these, especially on something like a portrait. Be sure when it's time to paint, you go back to your painting layer, so you don't accidentally start drawing on the layer with the guidelines. I notice that here her brow goes quite a bit over this guideline. But on my painting, it barely does. So if I want to get an accurate arch to her brow, I'll need to fix that. Dropping horizontal lines is great for checking distances between things, so keep this in mind if something looks off. Also, it's important to note that for this to work, the reference and the drawing must be perfectly side by side. Another way of measuring lengths and widths is by measuring one basic unit and then comparing it to all other objects in the picture. So adding a new layer, grabbing a red color, and making the size of the brush pretty small, I measure her eyes side to side. This can become a measurement now that I can compare all other things against. With magnetic checked at the bottom, I can carefully move this around and compare her other features. So now I can see the width of her nose from side to side here is pretty much equal to the length of her eye. And the length of her lips is larger than the eye, about 1.5 that measurement. So then of course we can also compare to our drawing. I can see here that I could do with making her eyes a bit longer side to side. This is just another way to make comparisons and see if you're on the right track with the size of features. Here's another measuring technique you can try. I'm adding a new layer, a new color, and grabbing the monoline brush. Now I'm just adding a border to the image, tapping with my pointer finger so that it snaps to a perfectly straight and vertical line. I do this around the whole image. And then I draw a vertical line down the middle and a horizontal line across the middle as well. What we've done is we've broken her down into 4 quadrants. And sometimes breaking the image down like this into smaller parts to focus on can be helpful in placing things. I duplicate the layers so that I can put this on top of my painting as well. Now I'm clicking the arrow and click magnetic on. Now I can drag this right over my drawing and try to place it in the exact same spot. With magnetic on, you'll see a blue line show up, letting you know that you're pulling it straight over. Now instead of looking at the piece as a whole, you can take a break and look at it in smaller sections, and make sure things are falling in the right spots. This also works to break up that negative space of the background nicely. You can merge these 2 grid layers together and lower the opacity as well. Just be sure when you go back to drawing, you're on your drawing layer and not the grid layer. Another accuracy check you can do is to compare angles. Adding a new layer and a new color, I draw on top of this angle of her jaw. Then I duplicate the layer and carefully drag it over to my drawing. Now I can see how I did. If your angle's off, it will be clear since it won't line up. So this is another great little check you can do. The last measuring trick I want to show you is dropping vertical lines. Again, I add a new layer and grab a color. And let's say I want to check what the inner corners of the eyes would hit if I drew vertical lines down. I see that they land here about the lips. So I'll want to make sure my drawing does the same. Let's do another. How about from the end of the eyebrow straight down to the shoulder? Again, be sure to tap with your pointer finger to make it a perfectly vertical line. And then over here, if I do the same thing and compare, I see that the negative space is not the same. So something's up. Either the eyebrow I've drawn needs to be moved over, or perhaps the neck needs to go inward more, or maybe a touch of both. Again, another great way to check proportional accuracy. So to recap, you can use horizontal lines, a basic unit, a simple grid, angles, and vertical lines to compare your reference to your drawing for better proportional accuracy. If proportional accuracy is not your intent, then no big deal. Just use these techniques when they're useful for what you're drawing. You can use these techniques in traditional mediums too. Just make sure your reference and your drawing are side by side. You can set this up with tape if you need to. Here I'm sort of ghosting over the reference to get the placement of the features with horizontal lines. When drawing a new subject, it might be nice to get down these basic lines. You can use a straight edge like a piece of paper or a ruler. Now, say I wanted to check this measurement here. First I would eyeball it, and then I could take a straight-edged piece of paper and make a little tick mark at where the start of the wolf's neck is. And the top of the paper will act as the top corner of the reference. Then I can bring that over to my drawing and make sure things line up in the same way. Now I can more accurately place that negative shape here. So here I'm doing it again, measuring out this distance and making a tick mark. And then I can bring it over to my drawing and mark the spot where the wolf's neck comes in over here. I would recommend drawing freehand as much as you can and then checking your measurements. Just because if you do too much measuring at the beginning before anything is up on the page, it can bog you down and you might lose some of your creativity trying to stay inside strict boundaries. So draw freely and then come in with measuring, I say. But of course, do what's best for you. Everyone's process is different, and even one drawing to the next can be different, so experiment.